Welcome back to week 6 of D-Cube Debrief. It's time to get the party started. Waiting for my guest. Okay. Hi, Jocelyn. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Perfect. Well, it's nice to meet you, even though it's over Instagram, like live.
Agreed. It's my first Instagram, and all I see are people's names on my faces, so I'm just a little bit distracted.
Yes,
trying to figure it all out.
So that will happen as people join, and people might comment and things like that. But yes, so first and foremost, I am so excited to hear a little bit about your journey as a dyslexic yourself, and then about your journey with your kids. So I remember you said one of your child was diagnosed, and one you say are exhibiting signs of dyslexia, right?
Yes, that's correct. So I have a 7-year-old who has been formally assessed and diagnosed, and I have a 5-year-old who shows, I would say, even more signs than my 7-year-old signed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's get started. Let's hear about I know we only have 30 minutes, so obviously we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to get a little synopsis of like, what was your journey like? When were you diagnosed? How, did you struggle through school or feel like you had successes? And then how did you know what to detect with your kids? So let's start with you.
Okay, so I was diagnosed in grade 1, or the spring of grade 1. And my parents had no idea, because at home I was able to read all the books in our house. Okay. And so I had a great way of memorizing the books around me. And my teacher was reading a book that was familiar, or I was reading a book to my teacher that was familiar, and she was a veteran teacher, I suppose, at the time. And I flipped the pages and kept reading the story correctly. So I flipped to the wrong page somehow, or missed a page, and I read the book perfectly. And that was a massive red flag. And so she had a conversation with my mom to basically say, off the record, your child there's something going on. This is what I think it is. She's really well behaved. And so you need to figure out how to get her help, because we're probably not going to have the services here for her. And so this is like, 32, 33 years ago. So my parents had me formally tested, and I do remember snippets of the testing.
Wow.
Over a course of 2 days, I remember he had Smarties. I remember there was a computer, which was big back in, we're talking the late 80s.
Right.
I remember having to press buttons and whatnot. So from there, we were actually moving. My dad was in the military. And so we were moving, and so my parents found a Montessori school, and I went there for, I believe it was 2 years, and I have memories of that too, of just how there were 3 kids in my class, but they kind of continued the CASA model where we were with all the kids in one big room. And I guess the idea was I was going to learn kinesthetically. I was going to learn through all the different modes of learning. And so I learned to read. And then I went back to public school, and I thought that was the end of the journey. That was the end. Sure. Yeah, that was the end. And I think my mom thought that was the end too, or I shouldn't say my mom. My parents thought that was the end of the journey too. Right. Once you can learn to read, you're fine. You're good. Right. And so I returned to public school, and I've never had an accommodation since then. So here we are, 30 years later. I made it through school, made it through my degrees, and came out okay.
Wow.
I do realize, it's interesting. I think I was talking to you in the chat that I read this book called The Dyslexic Advantage. Mm-hmm. And through reading that book this past year, it really has opened my eyes to where this idea that it doesn't end.
Yes.
It doesn't end. And there are plenty of experiences in my educational journey that I knew I was smarter than what my test results would show. I knew more of the material. I know I'm not a strong writer.
Right.
And in this book, it really helped me to realize like some of the things people have said to me, or just how the journey could have been different if I had some accommodations throughout school.
So, okay, just to quickly summarize for those who are listening and those who are listening later. So you were diagnosed and identified at a very young age, and then let's just say around 4th grade, it was like, everything is great. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting, and you grew up in Canada, correct? Oh, can you hear me, Jocelyn?
Sorry, that went all fuzzy on me.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know if you... Okay, so I asked, you grew up in Canada, correct?
That's right.
Right. And so it's interesting because I know certain countries are a little bit more advanced in knowing how to diagnose and identify. So I feel like given the late 80s, Canada was pretty progressive with being like, oh, yes, we can diagnose you with this. But it's just interesting that there wasn't a beyond. I mean, that's how your brain is wired. It doesn't just go away.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if, you obviously, you know more than I do. When I asked my mom, because she's actually visiting here right now, she just said nobody told her. And my mom's a nurse.
Yeah.
Like, my mom is a bright lady. My mom and my dad, thought by, putting me in this private school that probably was expensive for them. And,
right.
That probably was a big sacrifice, that once I learned to read, that was kind of the end of the journey. Or not that she didn't know that there were other things. So in university, I took, I did neuroscience, and I got into this class. First sign should have been that I couldn't decode the title of the course.
Okay.
And so that's probably like a huge red flag. So it was neuroendocrinology.
Wow.
And I get into it, my second year of university, and like I have to call my mom, I have to spell it to her. She tells me what it is, and I have to memorize it. And like the whole first term, if you will, up until the first test was all about the neurochemicals in your body,
mm-hmm.
and spelling counted. And so I had to spend so much of my time learning the spelling as well as the content, and just having, like, when I look back at that, like the acronym would have been just fine, but you had to be able to spell the whole word. And so I think my mom knew that there were things that continually were more difficult for me, but they were always there to support me.
Right.
So
right.
She is the person I would call, and now it's my husband who does that for me.
Right. I'm curious to know, before we shift about your kids, how did that impact you socially, emotionally? I mean, were there things that made it harder for you or that you get anxious about? Did you share you were dyslexic with any of your friends? I mean, what did that look like from the social aspect?
I don't remember any of that. So I moved a lot when I was little. So after I was diagnosed, went to Montessori, went back to public school. I then moved again. One last time. And I don't think there was anything distinguishing about me from any of my peer groups. I've never even thought of myself as dyslexic. So I was diagnosed with a reading disability. Nobody called it dyslexia. So it wasn't until even I met with my child's the psychologist and team that I paid to have my child diagnosed, that they were like, no, dyslexia is, it's a massive umbrella.
Yes.
So even the misinformation of that, even after, as we talked about, I'm also an educator. So I've taught for 15, 16, 17 years, whatever the number is now. And I was like, so I had a reading disability, but I didn't necessarily know I was dyslexic. Yeah. So no, in terms of schooling, I was fine. I didn't have any problems that I think identified me amongst my peer group.
Okay. No, and and it's a spectrum. So I know with some folks, they'll say, I'm severely dyslexic and I wasn't diagnosed until later, and socially it impacted me like this. And, so I was just curious to know your story with that.
I'm from a small village outside the small town. And so I think that was probably to my advantage. My high school had 500 kids.
Wow.
All really, mostly good kids, right?
Yeah.
Like just good farm, small town kids. And
Right.
so I think that was probably, there was no AV back in the day, or IB. What do you call it? You guys call it IB.
Or AP classes. Yes.
AP classes. Like that stuff didn't exist. I mean, it did in that we had like, I suppose we had level 1, 2, and 3.
Mm-hmm.
And my brothers were able to do like the level 1 math, for example. That's not my thing. And I do remember, because we have to pass provincial exams.
Okay.
In grade 11 in math and English. And I do remember my math teacher, I had to see a problem in every different way. So if it was A equals B plus C, I needed to see C equals B minus A. Or like what, I had to see examples of everything.
Right.
I couldn't just take what I knew and flip it. I really had, and so I do remember him being very good at doing that. I don't remember if I spent time at lunch or after school with him, and I wasn't the only one. There was like a bunch of us that had to do it, so I didn't really feel like I was different than anybody else.
Well, that's good. That's really good. Well, let's shift to your kids. So how did you know? I mean, obviously you're an educator, so I'm assuming given your struggles in the beginning and maybe some things reminded you of what you went through, how did you know this is what we need to do, and what kind of accommodations are put in place for your child? So the
7-year-old, so here we moved to the U.S. and things are different.
Yes.
I moved here. He was in kindergarten, and right away the difference is our kindergartens in Ontario, Canada, where I teach, are all play-based. So right away I see, this level, this differentiation between our two curriculums and what our expectations of children are. He also did a Montessori program, so he was actually in a Montessori program for kindergarten, and then COVID hit, right? So here, not only do we have something going on, but COVID hits. And so then we spent 1.5 years, as you know. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, where schools were shut down for a very long time. So anyway, so we kind of like at kindergarten, we know that he was had a late onset of language, but never required speech therapy. He then, as he got older, the R's didn't quite come in. So that was the one thing, but we know developmentally that can come in a little bit later. So I wasn't too concerned. COVID hits, we go home, and then grade 1 starts. He did virtual learning for a short period. He goes to a private school where they did resume in-person classes, but not still in a typical classroom. They weren't doing the guided reading, tables and things like that. They were, yes, in school, but with a lot of COVID measures in place. So still not your typical grade 1 classroom. I would say, a phenomenal teacher. She was so lovely and just loved him, which is really what I want in a teacher. I just want them to love my baby.
Of course, definitely.
And so we had a good experience in terms of that. And he was able, he can get 10 out of 10 on the spelling list in grade 1, but then he can't retain it.
Right. That works in memory.
So there was a little bit of this. He's also the youngest child in his class because he's an August 15th baby. And some of us may be aware that where I live, a lot of people keep their kids behind. Like They redshirt them. And so he's also the baby in the group. So I think, but he's one of the tallest. So we've got a lot going on there. And he does start a small group reading support via Zoom with a lovely lady who is Ortho Gilliam trained and all that. So he had a small group of his friends doing that, and she worked with him, kind of not specifically on Ortho Gilliam, but but kind of those lessons, like really systematic lessons.
Exactly. Yes.
And but it was over Zoom, which again
isn't ideal.
And so probably after Christmas, I started thinking, okay, this is more than just a boy. It's more than just reserved, because he likes to be correct before he offers.
Okay.
So a little bit of
sure. He wants to be sure.
Yeah, he wants to be sure. He's not really decoding things. So if I've taught him how to decode it on one page, he's not going to the next page and able to do it.
Right.
So there's some signs. And so I have a meeting with the reading support teacher who's been doing this with him. And I say, like, do you think I should get him tested? And she said, I think it would be a good idea to see what his profile was. And so I looked into that, and because of COVID, they were running about 4 to 6 months behind on their testing.
Wow.
And so we started the testing in August and finished in September of this year.
Oh, wow. So this is a fresh diagnosis.
Yeah.
Wow. But honestly, interviewing so many folks, you hear the early interventions make a massive difference. So, I mean, you had an early intervention, but obviously you didn't know that this was a lifelong journey until recently. And now you have your experiences, but you're also an educator, and then you know what plans to put in place for your son and then your younger child as well, because you said you're seeing more severe signs. Yeah. So really, you're a great resource.
My youngest son has a severe speech delay, so which is a huge red flag for dyslexia. And so specifically, his diagnosis is articulation. And so he's been in speech therapy for 3.5 years. And we still have...
Struggling.
Yeah, and he's also in a Montessori program. So he's been bombarded with sound knowledge from a phenomenal educator. She's also Ortham Gilliam trained. So he has been with this teacher for 3 years. So I know that he's, he's been in the right environment, and we're still not there.
Right. So is your older son in public school or is he still in private?
They're both in private school.
Okay. And honestly, just for audience watching this, that makes a huge difference. I mean, I've worked in both environments, and I know my first job when I was working with dyslexic students, there were kids that were coming from public school that were so beaten down, and just their self-esteem was totally just in the toilet. And it took them a while to build that trust, because they realized that the teachers in this school understood how their brain worked, and there were things to put in place, like comforts to put in place, that if it takes you a little bit longer to spell this, or if it takes a little bit longer to understand what we're talking about, it's fine. We'll just plug through. So I definitely feel like, and my youngest daughter actually is in a Montessori school, and it is a different approach. I mean, it is more play-based, it is more explorative, and I think that does help with anxiety too, if kids feel the pressure of, well, this kid's getting it and I'm not. But I mean, it's a different approach. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that.
I don't think either of them. So the speech does not stop my 5-year-old with his friends. His teacher says, and they almost all understand him. And now with him, not only do we have this severe speech delay, we put a mask on him all day, every day. Yeah. And his educators are all wearing masks all day.
And so we can't see, the mouth formations. And that makes a huge, huge difference. Like if you think about digraph TH versus... I mean, you know it.
I mean, it's that has been a huge struggle as well. So I am really hoping, if we ever get these masks off, these young babies, that he's going to actually see some. I mean, we've been seeing some quick progress. Not quick. Nothing's been quick. It's been 3.5 years of speech therapy, but we have been seeing some. He now is putting on the final sounds.
Okay.
And so we are seeing progress, and I do think when the masks come off, we're going to see some more progress. But there's no doubt that we are on a path to having his, having to do the testing with him as well.
Right, right. No, and I see comments, masks are so irritating, and they are. And I know that I have seen some speech pathologists on Instagram that they will get masks where it's clear here. Yeah. So then kids can actually see that. And I actually think it's really imperative for elementary school teachers, you know, kindergarten through third grade. I mean, all kids need to see your mouth, but I'm in a secondary position right now where it's more of the language teachers that are like, I need kids to see my mouth when I'm teaching Russian or when I'm teaching Spanish, so they can understand what, you know, the sound is. And it's definitely something to explore in terms of assessments and accommodations for kids with dyslexia during COVID. So I definitely feel like that could be a conversation within itself.
And it is. So so he does speech through the county, and then he does speech privately, and they both wear they both wear the mask with them. And then myself and one of my partner teachers, I wear it for one block with one student in one of my classes, and I have the clear mask. Unfortunately, the problem with the clear masks is they're like
it fogs up.
No, actually, I don't have any. Well, maybe it fogs up a little bit, and they're a little bit harder to wear, but they're very expensive.
Yes,
they're really not affordable. And so if you're buying them, and wearing one a day or two a day, you're spending $60 to $120 a month just on the mask for that. Wow. So they're kind of a little bit prohibitive in that sense.
Wow.
I get why not all educators are wearing them, because they're expensive.
Right, right.
But just to say that, I think that has added another level to somebody who has this, and not to mention how much speech he lost, like how much speech therapy he lost from the start of COVID. Right. And then eventually I was able to find somebody who would come and do in-person speech with him.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But again, like, how lucky am I that I could afford to afford the speech therapy, which is not inexpensive, and that somebody would actually come and do in person with my child.
Right. Yeah, right? A lot of this is definitely equity issues in terms of socioeconomics and, some families that can't afford these services, which is why we have to get a lot of schools on board. When you're talking about the cost of these masks, school districts, if they have the funds, they should, pay for teachers to have these. I mean,
and the school, the school. So I also work at the school my kids go to. So it's like a full circle here. And a whole other sidebar is I actually teach French as a second language. So
I forgot you're bilingual. Yes.
Yeah. So after I went on to be diagnosed and went through schooling, I then switched to French immersion, and also did, but I don't actually have as many issues in French as I do in English because of the different, the difference in the language. Yes. And so, if we want like a sidebar for my second grader, who we are working on the accommodations in his classroom. We are getting there. It's still not perfect. His teachers trying really hard to figure it all out. We're all trying really hard to figure it all out. But I also pay for private therapy.
Oh my gosh.
For him, and she actually comes to the school, pulls him from my French class.
Wow.
Does his so twice a week, and so I'm also paying on top of that for him to have that kind of intervention. And she is phenomenal. She's a speech language therapist who then went off to get her PhD. She's Orphan Gilliam trained, and so he's going through the Wilson program with her. And so he's getting bombarded, I think.
With everything he needs. Yeah.
With everything he needs, it's costing me a bloody fortune, which is fine. She's worth it, and I'm really hoping, and like just even how the COVID has impacted him. He actually had an assessment with her in kindergarten, and she sends home the letter because of the R's.
Yes, those bossy R's.
No joke. A month after, not even a month, maybe 2 weeks after I get the letter, and I'm about to set up whatever it is we're going to talk about and set up, COVID hits. And that service is gone now too. And so it was the start of mid-kindergarten that I had started to talk to this this interventionist, we'll call her. And it wasn't until the start of grade 2 that he got the service.
Wow.
Right? Because, well, she did virtual all last year. And because he was already doing virtual through the school, it wasn't what I thought he would need. I don't think he needed more virtual anything.
Right.
And so I think maybe in hindsight, that was a mistake on my part. Now that I know her and see what she's doing with him, I'm a little upset that maybe I didn't take that. But I also know he was getting it through somebody else too. So, I mean, I think at the end, I know we're coming to a, kind of a close, is that you never feel like you're doing enough.
Right.
Here I'm doing 1,000
so much.
So much. I know, I've read 1,000 books and I've educated myself on it. And I took your course, even though I already know so much. I'm still trying to learn, even if it's that one nugget that's going to change something for my children. And I realize that's all coming from a place of advantage. I realize it's all coming from a place of like somebody who's educated with like multiple degrees in education. And I'm still out there trying to find more and do more. And it never seems like I'm doing enough. He does Wilson twice a week. Well, should he be doing it 3 or 4 times a week? But I can't afford 3 or 4 times a week. Like there's all these things that you're just wondering if you're just ever doing enough. So I'm sure your viewers or listeners, I'm not sure what they're called, are all at home thinking the same thing. Am I doing enough?
Yeah. And Jocelyn, to come to an end to this, I think the biggest takeaway, because we're talking about this in the beginning with yourself, it's really a journey. I mean, you really have to understand that everyone's journey is individual, but collectively as a family, you're seeing this journey within yourself, within your kids, and you are doing everything. And I think you're absolutely right. This is coming from a place of advantage and being an educator and all of that. And I really hope those of you who are listening, wherever you are financially and in this journey, that there are resources and people to help and support you along the way. And that's really the main reason why I do the show every week. I mean, I love hearing everyone's stories. I love hearing, how people have navigated through the system, whether it's their own journey or their kids. So, Jocelyn, I really appreciate you finding the time to hop on this platform and share your story and your kid's story.
Oh, well, I'm thankful to be here. I think, even as an educator, like the amount I have learned in the last year that I think if you're a parent and or a teacher who's still, I was trained in balanced literacy. I mean, oh my God, right? Like as an educator today, I'm like, oh my God, like I can't believe that that's how so much of my training. And so even just stepping back, if you're a parent and or educator and being willing to acknowledge that there's more to learn. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so I really even started my journey on Instagram, typing in the science of reading. Mm-hmm. Finding these amazing
so much out there
educators that are like something new pops up in my Instagram every day about the science of reading, a different book to read, a different something that as a parent and or an educator you can then take. And then I dived very deeply into the science of reading this past year, and thinking about getting more formal training in either the Ortham Gilliam or the letters. I haven't figured it out because I do teach French often, and so it doesn't really help me in my job.
Sure.
But I'm still thinking of doing it because I think, maybe my job could change. Maybe I can do a little shape shifting, and because I think we need more educators who know more. I think we need educators who know more and to know that there is a systematic way to teach reading where all children can learn to read. And that is not common knowledge.
Definitely. No, I think that is a great way to end the conversation, because it really, you're absolutely right. I mean, with the science of reading and letters, I'm going through letters training myself right now.
I know you are.
It's eye-opening and it's amazing. So yes, thank you so much, Jocelyn. And thank you everyone who popped on to listen, and definitely share this video with anyone that you think would find it helpful. And I will see you guys next Saturday.
Have a great day.
Bye, you too.